Continuing my final shape build series here on the channel, with Prismatic Titan, you can actually have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, and the Void Overshield all at the same time. With this setup, you're going to have great survivability on top of a 67% damage resistance bonus on top of the Overshield. So let's break down what you're going to need for this. Now, the first thing you're going to need are the Abeyant Leap Exotic Boots. With this perk, Puppeteer's Control, it improves the Drengir's Lash aspect. Now, if you don't know what that does, essentially when you use your barricade, or in this case, your class ability, it'll create a ripple in reality that travels forward along the ground, suspending and damaging the targets it hit. Pretty much allowing for a free suspend, but with the Abeyant Leap, instead of one projectile, it actually sends out 3. Plus, the projectiles track targets more aggressively and travel farther, and you gain Woven Mail when you suspend a target. Now, the Woven Mail on suspend is actually going to be the big portion here, because with Woven Mail, you get a 45% damage resistance bonus, and that's going to be one of the parts that's really effective with this build. And I know what some of you guys are thinking, why don't you just use the exotic class item with the Abeyant Leap perk on it? Well, the problem with that is that the Abeyant Leap perk does not include Woven Mail on suspend. From what I understand, you only get the improvement to Drengir's Lash, which I don't think that's bad by any means, but Woven Mail is obviously such a big part in the game, and with this build in particular, that we had to go with the base exotic. Now, under the subclass for your abilities, I personally like having the Rally Barricade, but you can use Towering or the Thruster if you'd like. Now, no, there is a difference when using the Thruster versus the Barricade. The Barricade will send out the 3 lashes to suspend targets, but Thruster sends out a Tangle that'll track targets and then suspend in a detonation. Personally, I like Thruster for a little bit easier activities, but for tougher activities, I definitely opt for the Barricade for a little more protection. And with Rally in particular, I do get increased weapon reload speed, stability, and range. Now, for movement, I like Strafe Lift, but you can use Catapult or High Lift if you'd like. For melee, you're going to opt for the Shield Throw, mainly because this will bounce between targets and give you the Overshield, so that's how we're going to gain the Overshield portion on top of Woven Mail with the boots. And for the grenade, I'm opting for the Shackle Grenade, because remember, the boots say that when you suspend a target, it gives you Woven Mail. Shackle Grenade can actually proc that. For aspects, we already talked about Drengir's Lash, but the second one you're going to need is Knockout. So critically wounding a target or breaking their shield infuses your melee with arc energy and increases your melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with melee attacks makes you amplified and restores a portion of your health. The main thing is that once we have Knockout, we get the increased melee damage, and we also get amplified. Now, the amplified is important because under the artifact, we have a perk called Galvanic Armor. So while you have the Arc or Prismatic subclass equipped, incoming damage from combatants is reduced while amplified. So now we have an extra layer of damage resistance on top of everything that I previously mentioned. Out of the 21 fragments, these are the 5 that I really like for this setup. Number 1 being Facet of Hope. So while I have any elemental buff across the board, your class ability regenerates more quickly, and obviously I want to take advantage of Drengir's Lash as much as possible, so I want that class ability back as fast as possible. Next is Facet of Courage. So your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with Darkness debuffs. That's a plus 10 to Discipline. Now, we are going to be suspending a lot of targets, which is a Darkness debuff, which means my Void, Shield, Melee actually has increased damage when I bounce it off those targets, so that is going to potentially give me more crowd control and some overshield. Next is Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, and then rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. Obviously, this one is pretty basic, but it essentially allows us to have our abilities back faster across the board, which is definitely something that we want to take advantage of all of the buffs. Next is Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. While Transcendent, the effect is increased. That's a plus 10 to Strength. Obviously, another layer of damage resistance. And since this is kind of a close quarters build, you know, it's a Titan build, obviously, but we want to be close to suspend those targets, we can take advantage of increased damage resistance. Now, lastly is Facet of Purpose. Essentially, when you pick up an Orb of Power, it's going to give you a buff based on your super. And notice, I didn't talk about the super first, but the reason we're going with Glacial Quake, yes, the super isn't really good for single target. It's good for, you know, crowd control and, you know, bosses running into it. It can deal some decent damage. But the main thing is that when we pick up Orbs of Power, we can get Frost Armor. And at 5 stacks of Frost Armor with each orb we pick up, that is a 22% damage resistance bonus on top of Woven Mail, on top of the Overshield, on top of Facet Protection, and Galvanic Armor. For the other artifact perks, in the first column, you can choose whatever weapon champion mods you like. In the second column, these are all focused on the Origin Trait perk bonuses, so depending on what weapons you're using, definitely look into these. I like Overcharge Armory and Winning Hand in particular. In the third column, I just have on Overload Sword, but one of the big ones here is Threaded Blast, so destroying a tangle with a strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. It's really good for taking out a bunch of targets. Now, Now, in the 4th column, I just put on counter energy here since I'm not taking advantage of anything else. But in the 4th and 5th column, these ones are the main ones. So outside of Galvanic Armor, which we already talked about, you definitely want Radiant Orbs. So when you have the Solar Prismatic subclass equipped, picking up an Orb Power makes you Radiant. That's another light buff that we can add to our arsenal. Next is Shield Crush. This one's pretty important as well. So while you have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. And while you're Amplified or Radiant, your Grenade recharges faster and deals increased damage. This is just a good thing to have overall. And then I just tossed on Transference here. So you gain increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent, and weapon final blows while Transcendent refund light and dark energy after Transcendence ends. But you could switch this one out for something like Prismatic Transfer, Argent Blade, or whatever, but I personally like this setup. Now, since I already mentioned weapons, let's talk about what I'm using in this loadout in particular. Now, to be honest, you could honestly use any type of weapons for this build, but I'm going to talk about what I really like using and also an additional option if you wanted more Overshield. In the Kinetic slot, I really like the Call. Again, this is the new special rocket-assisted strand sidearm from the Pale Heart. This thing's fantastic. I have it crafted with Slice and Desperate Measures Enhanced. Slice adding that Sever debuff can also create tangles as well. Since I'm going to be abusing my class ability, I might as well take advantage of it. This thing hits like a truck and can stop unstoppable champions as well with this specific perk on the artifact. But to be honest, any strand special weapon would work here. I personally just like the Call. In the energy slot, I really like Graviton Lance this season. This thing hits like a truck, and especially after the pulse rifle buffs that they gave across the board, it feels really good. On top of it being an exotic, it also gets its own damage bonus there. But just running through the perks real quick. Black Hole, second shot of the burst rips a hole through space-time, doing high damage and recoil with no fall off. We have Hammerforged Rifling with accurized rounds and fitted stock. We also have Cosmology. This is the big one. So kills with the weapon cause enemy targets to detonate and spawn void projectiles that track targets. This thing is extremely good for crowd control. This is the void equivalent of something like Sunshot. So definitely, if you don't have your hands on this thing, definitely get your hands on it. With this Catalyst, it gives you Vorpal Weapon and another Overshield perk. So when you break the shield of a combatant, you will get an Overshield for yourself. So the weapon just has a lot of benefits across the board. But to be honest, any Void primary weapon will work here. I do have, this Recluse here with Enhanced Subsistence and Frenzy, but I would really recommend Graviton Lance. It can also pop anti-barrier champions this season with the artifact perk, so you can keep that in mind. And for your heavy weapon, you can honestly use what you want. I'm just sticking with the Void weapon theme because of what I have on my armor mods, which I'll talk about later. But I have this Edge Transit here that's enhanced, Envious Bait and Switch. I have this crafted Doom Petitioner from last season, Recon Precision Instrument. I have a decent role in this Falling Guillotine with Vorpal and Eco Red, so I could take advantage of both of those things. So you can honestly use whatever heavy weapon that you want here. Now, one final weapon combination that I'm going to mention that's pretty niche is pairing up a Strand primary with the Buried Bloodline Exotic sidearm. This thing is fantastic this season, and I'm going to talk about why. So with this perk, Hungering Quarrel, it double fires tracking bolts. Landing bolts leeches health from the target. We also have Hard Launch, Flared Magwell, and Hand Laid Stock, but Violent Reanimation is the big one. So multiple final blows with this weapon grant Devour to the wielder. So essentially with Devour, after every kill, we can get max health back and also grenade energy after every kill. So as long as we chain kills, we have ultimate survivability. And with its Catalyst, while you have Devour, the weapon weakens on hit. Now, the reason that's important is because of two artifact perks you can take advantage of. Number one being Void Hegemony. So while you have the Void or Prismatic subclass equipped, defeating weakened targets provides a small Void Overshield. So that means as long as you weaken a target with that weapon and kill them, you will get a Void Overshield. And with Expanding Abyss, Void sources deal increased damage to weakened targets. So if you weaken a higher tier enemy, a mini boss or a boss, for example, and then whip out your Void Heavy, that's going to deal even more damage to that target. Before diving into armor mods, let's talk about what stats to look for. So first up, we talk about it every video. Try to have tier 10 100 resilience. It's going to give you a 30% damage reduction, which you definitely want to take advantage of. And this, coincidentally, is tied to how fast we can get the class ability back for the Barricade and Drengir's Lash. So having this at tier 10, 100 is definitely the first one we want to focus on. Now, after that, I personally like Strength. It's tied to how fast we can get the melee back, and obviously I want the Void Overshield from the melee as much as possible. And then next, I do like Discipline. That is tied to how fast we're going to get that grenade back, and obviously Shackle is going to allow us to have even more Woven Mail. But again, the main one here is Resilience, then Strength, then Discipline, and then if you want to focus on Intellect, you totally can. On the helmet, the main one to have is Void Siphon. Again, this is going to match my Graviton Lance, but if you decide to use a different weapon, again, just make sure the Siphon mod matches up with the element type. But those rapid final blows I'm going to get with it are going to create orbs of power, which means I'm going to have a lot of those on the field to pick up for Frost Armor, again, with Faceted Purpose. And then next, I do like Special Ammo Finder, but I can switch this out for something like Dynamo. On the gauntlets, I am using Heavy-Handed, so my power melee final blows will create orbs of power. Note, just having one mod only gives us a 10-second cooldown in between orb generation, so you got to keep that in mind. And I'm also using Momentum Transfer, so when I cause damage with my grenade, it's going to give me a cooldown to my melee, and when I use my melee with Focusing Strike, it's going to give me a cooldown to my class ability. On the chest piece, I'm personally using Void Reserves here, so I get more ammo for my Void Heavy weapon in particular, or if I decide to use Buried Bloodline, this also helps out a lot. But again, just put on a reserve mod that matches whatever weapon type you're using, and then use whatever resistance mods that you like depending on what activity you're doing. On the boots, I like Recuperation, so each time I pick up an Orb of Power, it gives me health back. This is really good for harder activities, but it's not absolutely necessary for easier activities, so you could put on something like Invigoration for a reduction to your melee cooldown, or Insulation for the reduction to your class ability cooldown on Orb pickup. But the other two, I am rocking double Void Weapon Surge, so my Void Weapons gain a small bonus to damage when I have an Armor Charge. Your Armor Charge now decays over time. Essentially, when you collect Orbs of Power, you'll gain an Armor Charge. With this build, you can have a maximum of 3 Armor Charges, and with these blue mods, it puts a 10-second timer on those Armor Charges, so at 3 Armor Charges, we have 30 seconds of that bonus weapon damage. Lastly, on the class side, I'm using Powerful Attraction, so when I use my class ability, it collects all the nearby orbs around me, so that'll give me Armor Charges, that'll give me Frost Armor, and also Recuperation. I'm also using Reaper here, so after I use my class ability, I have 10 seconds to get a weapon kill to spawn another Orb of Power, and then I'm using Outreach as the final mod, so it reduces my melee cooldown when I use my class ability. Honestly, when I heard from a friend that you could achieve pretty much maximum damage resistance with a Titan build, I was like, how viable is that going to be? And to be honest, it's actually extremely fun, and once you start getting all the damage resistance buffs stacked with Woven Mail, having max Frost Armor, proccing faster protection, once you're amplified, getting Galvanic Armor, you'll notice that the enemies really do not hit as hard, and to be honest, having this set up with the Rally Barricade and Graviton Lance, having it reload really fast as well, goodness sakes, you can pretty much like set yourself up and just stay behind the barricade and just continue to get kills. It's honestly a really easy build to achieve, but still extremely powerful with both your abilities and your weapons. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is my max damage resistance Prismatic Titan build. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm actually going to put the dim link for this build in the description, so if you want to copy everything that I'm using, down to the subclass, the armor mods, the weapons, even the drip if you'd like. It'll include ornaments and shaders, so if you want to copy all that, go for it, test it out, and then come back to this video. Tell me what you like using with this build. Like I said, you can honestly switch out the weapons for whatever you would like. I just really like that setup. If you test out with Buried Bloodline and you're like, dang, this thing's actually very good with the artifact perks, go have fun with it. In any event, if you enjoyed watching, be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell next to notifications so you don't miss out on any other Final Shape builds I'm going to be dropping here on the channel. If you didn't know, we live stream here on YouTube and then also over on Twitch. Again, there's going to be the Salvation's Edge raid, there's going to be the new activity to get the exotic class items, the co-op mode, there's going to be plenty of stuff to do, so if you want to hop in for any of that, again, hop in the chat, and then also, if you want to be proactive, join my Discord. Again, people are going to be looking to play activities together, so hop on in. We're also talking about anime, tech, and plenty of other games as well. Lastly, if you want to help support the channel even more so I can continue making this content for you guys, you can always look into becoming a member. If you don't know what a membership is, it's essentially like a Twitch subscription. Again, you're going to get access to the emotes, the monthly badges, and the big thing, which is getting early access to all of my videos. So if you want to look into becoming a member, all you have to do is press the join button next to subscribe, and that'll give you a rundown with all the details you need. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been your boy. We'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!